A man who was detained during a raid connected to the Nancy Guthrie investigation claims he knows absolutely nothing about the case. The sheriff of Pima County states that this individual has not been cleared as a suspect in the disappearance of the 84-year-old mother of the Today Show host. We are uncovering more details about a potential high-tech breakthrough in answering who was inside Nancy Guthrie's home as days of searching stretch into weeks. We are on the case, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey everyone, thank you for following this story with us. We can bring you this coverage thanks to our outstanding partner, Morgan & Morgan. There is a reason why On the Case ranks among the top true crime shows on YouTube, and there is a reason why Morgan & Morgan stands as America's largest injury law firm. For more than 35 years, they have fought relentlessly for their clients and recovered more than $30 billion on their behalf. The evidence lies in their impressive record, with over 1,000 lawyers spread across more than 100 offices nationwide. Hiring Morgan & Morgan feels like enlisting an entire army to fight on your behalf, a dedicated team that battles fiercely to secure the compensation their clients rightfully deserve. Not every law firm operates the same way. Choosing the wrong one could leave you defeated before the fight even begins. If you have ever suffered an injury, consider reaching out to Morgan & Morgan. Their fee remains nothing unless you win. For more details, visit forthepeople.com/OTC. You can click the link below or scan the QR code displayed on your screen. There have been moments throughout this investigation where it feels as though authorities are tantalizingly close to the answers the Guthrie family so desperately seeks. Yet there are other times when new pieces of information emerge that suggest law enforcement still faces a long road ahead. Today, the FBI revealed they have received nearly 20,000 tips since Nancy Guthrie vanished on February 1st. In an interview with NBC News, the Pima County Sheriff reported that combined, the FBI and his department have fielded roughly 50,000 tips. That represents an overwhelming volume of information to sift through. Now we hear from a man detained about a week ago during a raid on his residence. This individual was pulled over during a traffic stop in Tucson, near a Culver's restaurant. He faced no arrest, only detention, questioning, and eventual release. Through his attorney, he has now issued a public statement. He is a 37-year-old man. Authorities detained him while executing 2 federally approved search warrants, one during the traffic stop involving his Range Rover and another at his home where he resides with his 77-year-old mother. The address connects to a home valued at roughly $1 million, situated in an affluent neighborhood approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's residence. An Arizona law firm released a statement to 12 News in Phoenix, identifying their client as Luke Daly. The firm confirms that Luke Daly was the target of 2 search warrants executed on February 13, 2026. Both Mr. Daly and his mother were detained by law enforcement during the execution of those warrants. Neither Mr. Daly nor anyone else connected to him has any involvement whatsoever with Nancy Guthrie, and he possesses no information whatsoever related to her abduction. Like the entire Tucson community, both Mr. Daly and his mother hope fervently that Nancy will be returned safely to her family. The man was detained and then released on the night of the 13th when a SWAT team entered his home. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, who recently issued a statement clearing the Guthrie family of involvement, though the FBI has declined to comment, also cleared the spouses within the Guthrie family. When questioned about Daly, whom he described as a person of interest, and whether that individual had been cleared, Nanos told 12 News the following: "Per our court order, we were required to search those homes. People were present inside, family, friends, whoever. We could not allow them to remain while we conducted the search." Were they detained? Of course not. They were free to leave, but they could not stay in the home. We knew we were searching for one specific person at that location, and the other person we sought was Nancy. She was not present. Nancy was not there. The person of interest provided a statement and complied with everything required by the warrant, perhaps buccal swabs for DNA, photographs, or fingerprints. We obtained all that was needed, and he was released. Does that mean he is no longer considered a suspect? No. We will continue our investigation. We still have evidence from the home to process. What if we discover Nancy's DNA inside that residence? Right now, that remains a possibility. That was the sheriff speaking conversationally in a one-on-one interview with 12 News. It remains unclear whether any DNA belonging to Nancy Guthrie was recovered from Luke Daly's home, but his attorney has released a firm statement denying any connection or knowledge of her disappearance. You can interpret the sheriff's remarks in various ways. This week, investigators have been visiting gun stores throughout the Tucson area. They reportedly carried a list of names along with photographs, asking store owners and employees whether any of those individuals had been customers over the past year. Authorities are still awaiting results on whether the unknown DNA sample recovered inside Nancy's house could become the critical breakthrough in this investigation. We know that particular sample did not match Nancy herself, nor did it match any members of her family or individuals close to her. When that DNA was entered into the CODIS database, the FBI's collection of profiles from individuals who have been arrested or convicted, it produced no match. However, that does not render the sample useless. CODIS contains profiles representing only about 4 to 6% of the general population. The Pima County Sheriff has confirmed that investigators are now employing genetic genealogy techniques to attempt to identify the source of the DNA found in Nancy's home. We discussed yesterday how this technology has successfully resolved cases that were at serious risk of going cold. Genetic genealogy involves taking a DNA sample and tracing potential relatives through ancestry databases, building out family trees to narrow down possibilities. Analysts search platforms, such as those used by 23andMe or similar services, to identify shared genetic markers that might belong to third or fourth cousins. This method has proven remarkably effective in numerous high-profile investigations. Here is the arrest footage of a man named Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez. This case is entirely unrelated to Nancy Guthrie, yet it illustrates the power of genetic genealogy. In August of 2023, Martinez Hernandez raped and murdered a woman named Rachel Morin in Maryland. Morin was a 37-year-old mother of 5 who had been out for a jog on a trail. Martinez Hernandez had entered the United States illegally after fleeing his native El Salvador, where a murder warrant had already been issued against him. When authorities uploaded the DNA evidence from the Maryland crime scene into CODIS, no match was found. You can see the clear parallel to the Guthrie investigation. Martinez Hernandez had no prior criminal record in the United States, so he was absent from the database. Genetic genealogy allowed investigators to examine ancestry markers, construct a family tree, and eventually trace him through distant relatives. 10 months after Rachel Morin's murder, authorities located him outside a bar in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Martinez Hernandez is now serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Another landmark case where genetic genealogy delivered justice was the decades-long hunt for the Golden State Killer. This investigation essentially brought the technique into widespread public awareness. California authorities had pursued dozens of rapes and more than a dozen murders committed in the 1970s and 1980s, all unsolved for years. They preserved DNA evidence from those crime scenes, but when it was run through CODIS over the decades, no hits emerged. Once genetic genealogy became viable, investigators compared the samples to public databases such as GDmatch, which people use to construct family trees. There was no direct match to the suspect, but distant cousins were identified, allowing law enforcement to build the family connections. Those leads ultimately pointed to Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer who became known as the Golden State Killer. He was arrested in 2018. He is now 80 years old, still alive, and serving 13 consecutive life sentences. Law enforcement officials state that he committed dozens of rapes, but due to California's statute of limitations, he could not be prosecuted for those sexual assaults. Returning to the Nancy Guthrie investigation, this case differs significantly from the examples just mentioned. We do not know Nancy Guthrie's current whereabouts. The painful reality is that we do not know whether she remains alive. Yet the presence of a DNA sample in her home that belongs neither to her nor to her family or close associates could prove to be the decisive clue that solves this mystery. The sheriff has publicly stated his belief that the individual captured on video on the front steps of Nancy Guthrie's house may not have acted alone. He indicated that investigators are not ruling out the involvement of accomplices, It is unclear whether law enforcement possesses additional surveillance footage beyond the released images of the masked figure armed with a firearm standing on those front steps. The sheriff has expressed his conviction that this crime was targeted, meaning the perpetrator or perpetrators knew precisely whom they intended to victimize. He described this assessment as a hunch during one interview. Another question that has surfaced repeatedly concerns the possibility that Nancy Guthrie was taken across the border into Mexico. From her home, one can reach the border in under 2 hours by driving due south. The nearest crossing point to Tucson is in Nogales, Arizona. Vehicles cross into Nogales, Sonora, Mexico at that location. A prominent wall stands there, a structure frequently featured as a backdrop in political discussions about immigration. Crossing from the United States into Mexico at that point is notably straightforward, with minimal stops for outbound traffic. However, a substantial number of cameras monitor every vehicle that passes through that border crossing. Alternative routes exist outside the walled area, where one could theoretically cross on foot into Mexico. The terrain in those areas is extremely challenging. Harsh desert landscape, uneven ground, and no flat paths. One must question how feasible it would be for a kidnapper to transport an 84-year-old woman across such unforgiving ground. The FBI informed CBS that they have maintained contact with Mexican authorities since the beginning of the case. The Pima County Sheriff has stated there is currently no indication that Nancy Guthrie was transported across the border. I consulted retired FBI agent Greg Rogers regarding the likelihood of this investigation extending into Mexico. He responded that he could assure everyone the Mexican Federal Police, their counterparts, have been involved from the outset. This involvement stems directly from Tucson's proximity to the border. As previously noted, crossing at Nogales is straightforward, but cameras are present in large numbers. From his years working cartel-related cases, he emphasized the close connections between Mexican Federal Police and cartel organizations in the region. They have already spoken with cartel elements about this matter. If Nancy Guthrie were in Mexico, particularly in the Nogales area, the New Generation Cartel is highly active there. Nothing occurs in territory they dominate without their knowledge. The Mexican Federal Police have spoken with them because nothing happens in an area they dominate without their awareness. I am not suggesting this case involves cartels in any way. I am simply stating that they would know if she were present there. The amount of reward money available for information leading to resolution, in this case, has increased significantly. The FBI continues to offer $100,000 as a reward. Crime Stoppers has now added another $100,000, funded by a personal injury lawyer based in Wisconsin. Joining us once again to discuss developments in this case is missing persons private investigator Steve Fisher. Thank you for returning to Law and Crime. You know, today on day 18, I had this moment where it feels like there are periods when progress seems imminent. Perhaps it was the recent raid on the home that created that sense of momentum, as if they were closing in. But then you hear about investigators visiting gun shops, armed with lists of 20 to 40 names and photographs, asking if anyone recognizes these individuals. At that point, you begin to worry that perhaps they are not as close as it seemed, and on day 18 or 17, whatever the exact count, they may still be struggling to identify those responsible and locate Nancy. From your perspective, looking in as an experienced investigator, what do you assess the current state of this investigation to be? As you noted, it is difficult to determine definitively from the outside. I recognize that when investigators make those business visits showing photographs and surveillance stills to other locations, they have stated that 400 personnel, including agents, deputies, and other investigators, are actively working this case. So even if they are narrowing focus through genealogy or evidence from the recent search warrants, these broader efforts continue as a safeguard. Therefore, I do not view those visits as necessarily indicating a lack of leads. But I would be surprised if no additional search warrants, at least ones we become aware of, are executed today or soon. If that pattern holds without new developments, concern would begin to grow. From their public posture, there appears to be a noticeable difference between the messaging around the very first search warrant, the one involving the individual near Rio Rico named Carlos, and the more recent ones, including the Range Rover stop. In the earlier instance, Authorities were very clear in stating that Carlos had no involvement. With the latest warrants, they repeatedly emphasized that no arrests were made, yet evidence continues to be processed. That shift in language makes me wonder if there may be some tangible link emerging, even if it does not directly implicate those individuals. It could be a connection that propels the investigation to the next phase. We have frequently covered cases where suspects or fugitives are apprehended within the first 24 to 48 hours, and it almost becomes an expectation. Now we are 18 days in, and in some missing persons investigations you have handled, though this one differs in many respects, what typically happens by day 18? You start to worry that if the same patterns persist a week from now, DNA analysis ongoing, leads being followed without breakthrough, the case becomes progressively more difficult to resolve. This case stands apart even from most experienced FBI agents' typical caseloads. Kidnappings involving ransom demands or abductions of an 84-year-old woman are exceptionally rare. I have worked high-profile, long-running missing persons cases, such as Kaylee Goncalves or Riley Strain in Nashville, among others. Fatigue inevitably sets in. Public theories proliferate, which is understandable, and law enforcement tends to become more reserved in communications. In those prior cases, there were moments that felt entirely hopeless, weeks passing with no apparent movement. Then suddenly, a breakthrough occurs. Then suddenly, boom, it breaks open. I do believe that if authorities truly had nothing substantial, and I am speaking particularly about the FBI here, they would be making more public appeals. We would see additional press conferences, greater outreach to the media and public for assistance. The fact that they remain relatively quiet suggests they are digging deeply into specific evidence, whether genetic genealogy, DNA processing, witness statements, or undisclosed surveillance. They are not broadcasting broad calls for help in the same way as before. One element you mentioned tweeting about was the Adult Protective Services business card left at the scene. This detail has circulated widely online. Brian Anton from News Nation captured video footage when media gained brief access to the property after it was released back to the family. People approached the front steps and photographed what was visible. What stands out to you about that Adult Protective Services card and its apparent timing? I consider it highly significant, and I wish more attention were focused on it. When Brian Anton filmed that segment, the primary emphasis was on the visible blood evidence, which is understandable, but when I zoomed in on the footage, I noticed the card had been slipped into the side of the door frame. It was from Arizona Adult Protective Services, a division under the Arizona Department of Economic Security. These investigators respond to reports of elder abuse, financial exploitation, neglect, or similar concerns involving vulnerable adults. It appears that some report or concern prompted an investigator to conduct a welfare check or door knock at the residence. If no one answers, it is standard procedure for them to leave a business card. I raised this point on social media about 10 days ago, which generated some discussion before it faded. Recently, a reporter asked the sheriff about it during his latest round of interviews. He quickly dismissed it, saying a neighbor had called because Nancy was reported missing, which triggered the visit. That explanation does not align logically for me. The disappearance occurred on a Sunday around noon. The sheriff himself stated he personally responded to the scene that same Sunday, which he noted is uncommon for him because the blood evidence immediately elevated it beyond a routine missing person call to a potential crime scene. Homicide investigators were brought in right away. If a neighbor called Adult Protective Services on a Sunday, when the agency is typically closed, how would that generate an immediate response? And even if a call was placed, the sheriff claimed the investigator left the card that very same day. Why would authorities permit an APS worker to walk through an active crime scene with visible blood evidence? Why allow them to physically touch the door and window areas precisely where the Ring camera is positioned to place the card? That scenario makes no sense whatsoever. I believe there is more to this story than has been disclosed. I have reached out to the head of the Arizona Department of Economic Security responsible for Adult Protective Services. They have opened my email 14 times but have not responded. They have not gotten back to me. I hope that reporters will reach out to them as well. They will not release specific case details, and they should not, but it would be valuable to clarify whether that card was left before the crime occurred or if an investigator actually entered an active crime scene. If the latter happened, that represents a serious contamination risk because that person could have introduced the foreign DNA. But beyond that possibility, I think this needs deeper examination because someone had a reason to contact Adult Protective Services. Was there concern about financial exploitation? Perhaps Nancy was loaning money excessively to someone? Or was a caregiver, aide, or another individual taking advantage in some way? Those kinds of details could point toward motive or suspects. Another topic you mentioned seeing me post about was the signal sniffer technology potentially used to detect a pacemaker signal. We know Nancy had a pacemaker that disconnected from her iPhone at some point. This new equipment is being deployed in an attempt to locate any residual signal. From what has been explained publicly, though, it does not appear to be an infallible citywide scanning miracle device. It is valuable technology. We use it increasingly in search and rescue operations. However, it performs best in controlled environments like forests or contained disaster zones, where search teams can clear the area of their own electronic devices to minimize interference. Typically, a helicopter or drone sweeps overhead, searching for low-frequency cell phone signals. Even when a phone battery is nearly dead, it may still emit a weak, persistent signal for some time. The device detects any radio frequency emission and filters to identify those consistent with medical implants like pacemakers, which operate in specific narrow bands. Pacemakers are engineered for very long battery life, 5 to 7 years, so their transmissions are low power, short range, and intermittent, perhaps every 3 or 4 minutes. It is not designed to sweep an entire urban area effectively. This tool excels when the missing person is believed to be in a defined, smaller zone, an avalanche field, wooded search grid, collapsed building after an earthquake where directional locating is feasible. In a sprawling city like Tucson, its utility is limited. That said, in a case receiving this level of resources, it makes complete sense to deploy every available asset. You never know what might yield a result, so there is no fault in trying it. It underscores the immense effort being poured into this investigation as the days accumulate. On one hand, the deployment of 400 personnel, assistance from Apple and Meta, advanced technology, outreach to Mexican authorities, and every high-tech tool available demonstrates how extraordinarily difficult certain cases can be to crack. On the other hand, it is sobering to see such massive resources mobilized, yet still searching for an individual who, from the released images, does not appear to be a highly sophisticated operative. It serves as a stark, real-world reminder of how challenging it can be to solve even seemingly straightforward crimes. Another piece that has received significant attention is the success of genetic genealogy in cases like Brian Koberger. We have seen it work effectively in the Golden State Killer investigation, the Rachel Morin murder in Maryland that we discussed earlier, and others where the DNA did not initially match CODIS. Have you personally worked cases where this DNA technology played a role in tracking down suspects? And how effective do you believe it can be here, especially when another day passes without a publicly identified suspect? Yes, I have used it in prior investigations. It is unfortunate that the foreign DNA sample, particularly the one recovered inside the house, not from the glove, did not match Nancy or anyone known to the family. That sample from inside the house is crucially important to me, the truly foreign DNA that does not belong to her or any known associate. It is regrettable that it did not hit in CODIS, but I am confident investigators will identify the source through genetic genealogy. Companies like Othram are transforming the landscape of cold case resolution. They routinely solve mysteries that have lingered for 50 years or more. The capabilities of modern forensic genetic genealogy are nothing short of remarkable. There are other labs performing similar work, though Othram stands out for the speed and success they have demonstrated in high-profile matters. I believe they contributed to at least a couple of the cases we referenced earlier. The process takes somewhat longer now because analysts must trace through increasingly distant relatives. They build extensive family trees from shared genetic markers and narrow possibilities step by step. But in a priority case like this one, multiple teams are likely working in parallel. That coordination should accelerate the timeline considerably. We might see a viable lead emerge, within the same time frame as the Brian Koberger identification, perhaps 3 to 7 days from when the process fully ramped up. Keep in mind that quality control steps are mandatory before any external lab can submit profiles to CODIS. However, that does not prevent simultaneous work by private labs on the investigative side. The sample was likely sent out quickly after initial testing, so the genealogy effort has probably been underway for several days already. If no additional surveillance footage surfaces publicly, and the recent search warrants have not produced an immediate breakthrough, I expect genetic genealogy to be the key that unlocks this case. It could realistically take another 4 to 7 days before we see movement. The way authorities have spoken about this unknown DNA sample and the fact they released information about it publicly suggests it is far more significant than incidental transfer. It does not sound like the kind of trace left by a routine service provider, such as a pool cleaner or gardener. We know those individuals have already voluntarily submitted DNA samples for comparison. Since the sample remains unidentified, it cannot belong to anyone in that known circle. This points to someone truly outside the regular orbit of visitors to the home. From what has been shown publicly, Nancy Guthrie did not appear to have many outside visitors beyond family, close friends, and service personnel. The presence of truly foreign DNA inside the residence is therefore particularly compelling. It strongly suggests some form of struggle or close physical contact occurred within the house. The fact that recoverable DNA was left behind by an unknown party reinforces that likelihood. We continue to hope for the best possible outcome, but the evidence pattern points toward a concerning scenario. With the volume of resources committed 400 personnel, tech partnerships, international coordination, I feel strongly that this individual will ultimately be identified and apprehended. In cases of this magnitude, the public rarely knows more than 5% of what investigators actually hold. The FBI, in particular, maintains extraordinary operational security. They are extremely purposeful about what they share publicly. Sometimes they go completely silent on active investigations. The sheriff has opted for one-on-one interviews rather than large press conferences. He mentioned he prefers that format because he finds the shouting question environment of group pressers difficult. One detail you were posting about that caught my attention was this Adult Protective Services note. It has been circulating heavily across the internet. Brian Anton with News Nation captured clear video of what appeared to be a business card left on Nancy Guthrie's front steps. This was during the brief period when media was permitted access to the property after it was returned to the family. People walked up and documented what remained visible. What particularly stands out to you about that APS business card and the timing surrounding it? I think it is genuinely important, and I genuinely wish the media and public would press harder on this point. In Brian Anton's footage, the focus understandably stayed on the visible blood evidence. But when I paused and zoomed in closely, I saw the card had been slid into the side of the doorframe. It is clearly from Arizona Adult Protective Services, which operates under the Arizona Department of Economic Security. Their investigators handle complaints involving elder abuse, financial exploitation, neglect, self-neglect, and related vulnerabilities. Something evidently triggered an investigator to make an in-person visit to the home. When no one answers the door, the standard protocol is to leave a contact card. I first highlighted this detail on Twitter roughly 10 days ago. It sparked some initial online discussion before fading from attention. In the sheriff's most recent interviews, a journalist directly asked him about the card. He brushed it aside quickly, stating it was simply a neighbor who called because Nancy had gone missing. That call supposedly prompted the APS visit. That account does not hold up under scrutiny for me. The disappearance was reported around noon on a Sunday. The sheriff personally confirmed he responded to the scene that same Sunday, something he described as rare for him because the blood evidence immediately indicated foul play. Homicide was involved from the outset. Adult Protective Services offices are closed on Sundays. How could a neighbor's call on a closed day generate an on-scene investigator leaving a card that very afternoon? Even assuming a call was somehow routed, why would law enforcement allow an APS worker to enter and traverse an active crime scene? Why permit physical contact with the door and window frame right where the Ring camera is mounted to place the card? It makes zero sense. I believe there is considerably more to this story than has been shared publicly. I have attempted to contact the head of the Arizona Department of Economic Security overseeing adult protective services. They have opened my email 14 times without responding. I sincerely hope legitimate reporters will pursue this angle with them. They will not disclose protected case specifics, and they should not, but confirming the sequence of events around that card would be enormously clarifying. Was it placed before the incident? Or did someone walk through an active crime scene? If the latter, that introduces a major contamination issue, potentially explaining the foreign DNA. Beyond contamination concerns, the mere fact that someone felt compelled to involve adult protective services suggests underlying issues. Perhaps suspicions of financial exploitation, Nancy loaning money unwisely, or being taken advantage of. Or concerns about a caregiver, aide, or acquaintance exploiting her vulnerability. Those threads could lead directly to motive or persons of interest. Another point you referenced from my post concerns the signal sniffer technology for detecting a pacemaker. We know Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from her iPhone at a certain point. Authorities are employing this equipment in hopes of picking up any lingering signal. From descriptions available, however, it is not a magical device capable of sweeping an entire city effortlessly. It is excellent technology and increasingly used in search and rescue, but it performs optimally in controlled settings, forests, avalanche zones, building collapses where teams can eliminate interference from personal devices. Helicopters or drones typically fly patterns searching for low-frequency cell signals that persist even as batteries die. The sniffer identifies radio frequencies and filters for medical device signatures operating in specific bands. Pacemakers transmit infrequently every 3 to 4 minutes, with very low power over short range to conserve battery life of 5 to 7 years. It is not built for broad urban sweeps. It shines when the search area is contained and directional locating is practical. In a large city environment like Tucson, effectiveness diminishes significantly. Nevertheless, with the scale of resources here, deploying it costs little and could yield something unexpected. There is no criticism in exhausting every option. All these assets, 400 investigators, support from Apple and Meta, outreach to Mexico. Cutting-edge tools highlight how profoundly difficult certain investigations prove to be. Yet it remains striking that such an operation continues hunting someone who, based on released images, does not project the profile of an elite criminal mastermind. It is a sobering illustration of real-world investigative challenges. Genetic genealogy has delivered breakthroughs in cases like Brian Kohberger. We have seen it succeed in the Golden State Killer matter, the Rachel Morin case we covered, and others where CODIS initially returned nothing. Have you incorporated this technology in any of your own missing persons or tracking efforts? And how potent do you view it as a tool here, particularly as days continue without a named suspect? Absolutely, I have utilized it successfully in previous work. The truly critical foreign DNA is the interior sample, not the glove trace that matches neither Nancy nor her known circle. It is disappointing it was absent from CODIS, but genetic genealogy remains the most promising path forward. In the quiet streets of Tucson, an 4-year-old mother vanished in broad daylight, leaving behind only blood on the porch, a mysterious masked figure on camera, and a single foreign DNA sample inside her home. Weeks later, hundreds of investigators, millions in rewards, genetic genealogy labs working around the clock, helicopters sweeping for pacemaker signals, yet the silence remains deafening. This is not just a crime story. It is a stark, heartbreaking reminder that evil can walk among us wearing ordinary faces. The most dangerous predators often do not look like monsters. They blend in, they wait, they choose the vulnerable. An elderly woman living alone should never have to become a statistic because society looked the other way. Nancy Guthrie's case pleads with us. Pay attention to the quiet cries for help. Notice the unexplained bruises, the sudden fear in someone's eyes, the strange financial patterns, the unfamiliar visitors. When Adult Protective Services leaves a card, when a neighbor hesitates to speak, those are not small details. They are alarms we must not ignore. We owe it to every grandmother, every mother, every fragile life to stay vigilant, to ask questions, to care enough to act before the porch light goes out forever. Because somewhere right now, someone is still hoping someone else will notice.